Well, good afternoon, everyone. No, good morning. It's been a little bit chaotic here already, so I apologize for seeming a little
Well, there's a big
disoriented.
game coming up Sunday.
There is, yes. We are fresh from our joint KASB USA Super Bowl party this morning, and so we're glad to come to you. I am joined, of course, by G.A. Bowie, Executive Director of United School Administrators. He is here for a couple reasons, partly filling in for Leah Fleiter, who's usually here but is traveling to Washington, D.C., and because he had some exciting experiences this week at the Capitol that he may share with us a little bit.
Yeah.
So
well, it's a great experience. Everyone should at least do it once or twice in their
right.
lifetime.
That's right. So we will always present opportunities for you if that's something you do want to do. Of course, I'm Mark Tallman. Thanks for joining us. We're wrapping up the third week of the 2020 legislature. We're recording on Friday, January 31st, and so we're very excited about turning the calendar into February. Just maybe should briefly note we're still kind of in that part of the session where bills are being introduced every day, committees are starting. We're a couple of weeks away from the deadline for most individuals and non-exempt committees, so kind of keep watching. There'll be hearings continuing to pop up, and just you might want to think about, we're about a month away already from turnaround, which is the point at which bills have to be considered by their first house. So we're starting to churn through the process, but we're still getting a lot of ideas coming through every year.
And it's just a little bit different because the last 8 years, 9 years, Mark, you've been at the forefront of this, really going forward with the school finance and what we're doing and how we can do it, and trying to avoid cuts, and then the Supreme Court pieces that have jumped in there. So for you, it looks really different. You're not the urgency is not quite there like it has been in the past, but the bills are still there.
The bills are absolutely there, and you never have to doubt that there will be education issues to deal with. So I think what we'll do, let's hit briefly on the major hearings and activities this week. We'll turn a little bit ahead to next week, and then maybe talk a little bit about some of the more complicated issues and what school leaders might want to be doing and talking about. If you have a chance to, maybe you're going to a Super Bowl party with your local legislator. What is some small talk?
Chance
for a conversation. So
lots of commercials and half times. I understand.
That's right. Yeah, don't pay attention to those, or watch those, ignore the game, talk a little politics. But so this week there were a couple of kind of, again, a range of interesting hearings. I will briefly mention them. Join in if you want. We'll signal out those that we think deserve maybe a little bit more in-depth talk. The Senate Federal and State Affairs Committee had a hearing earlier this week on Senate Bill 250. This is a bill that would specifically add hairstyles and hair textures associated with racial characteristics to the Kansas Act Against Discrimination. It's designed out of some national stories of students and in other cases employees where they feel they have been discriminated against because of hairstyle. KASB, it was really neutral on this. We did introduce some written testimony, which was really just a caution that if you identify and single out specific characteristics and say you may not discriminate on this basis, it kind of raises the question, well, does that mean if it's not listed, it's okay? Right. So it's a complicated area. We'll see if the committee moves forward with this. This week, a similar bill was introduced in the House. It has not yet been scheduled. So the key thing that for school leaders is just remember, this may be an issue where if you have some controversy over hairstyle,
or what's it say in your handbook?
That's right. What's it say in your handbook? Right. There could be a challenge if it's felt that this is somehow discriminatory for racial characteristic. Obviously need to be sensitive all the way around. Another bill which really received no controversy, and we would expect to move through pretty quickly, but you never know, is House Bill 2488. It was presented, mostly developed by the school nurses, and what it would do is just sort of clarify and update a lot of statutes to make clear how and when you can provide life-saving medications. It's really designed to say maybe a student is having an emergency, but they don't have an EpiPen or something like that, allows districts to maintain a supply, take action. Again, probably something that seems really common sense, but in this area you need laws to authorize what you can do. That's what this is about.
There's some protection pieces there for the school nurses
as well. Exactly. And so that's one where, again, we testified in favor of that. I think there's pretty broad consensus around that. There is much less consensus around House Bill 2465. You came out of testimony on that.
Yep.
I'll briefly describe the bill, and then you can kind of give us a sense of what the issues are.
Can I give a blow-by-blow?
As you wish. This is a bill dealing with the existing tax credit for low-income student scholarship program, which allows people, individuals, corporations, to get a state tax credit for making a contribution to organizations which then use the money to provide scholarships to free lunch eligible students to go to a private school. Under some amendments in the law, the school must be accredited by either the state or another accrediting agency that the State Board of Education approves. But the kicker is that to be eligible, you not only must be free lunch, you must be attending a school that the state board said is one of the 100 lowest performing elementary schools. So this kind of is designed to say you're in a school which some would say failing, I think we would say is a school generally with a lot of challenging students, right. You could go somewhere else. The bill, or if you have not been in a public school before, but your normal school would be one of those schools. This bill does two things. It allows free or reduced lunch eligible kids, which adds about 10% generally to the population, but then it removes the requirement of that you be in one of these schools. So essentially, any free or reduced lunch eligible student attending any public school in the state would be eligible to receive one of these scholarships. Right. It doesn't change the cap on funding. There's no additional money, but it does mean that if dollars were available, excuse me, up to about a $10 million cap, it could expand the number of students that could take advantage. Right. Hearing was yesterday. So what did you see?
My first question for you, Mark, and this was batted around a couple of times in the committee. Do you remember how this bill originally came out? Or what time in the morning it originally came out?
Well, here's my recollection. This bill, this concept, had a lot of hearings and discussion in committee. It never came out of committee. During the
infamous,
the somewhat infamous late night session when the House, actually I think it may have been on the floor of the Senate, was assembling a number of what some call policy provisions around school finance. Right. It was needing to change school finance. The teacher due process law issue was passed then. This was included. There were a number of other pieces that were added as amendments to what became a massive package, went to conference committee. This provision survived. Right. Many others didn't, and that's what started the program.
So this was one of those 4 a.m. of final approvals that went to the governor's desk along with the teacher due process.
And that's right, packaged in with a number of other provisions.
And so this bill has never gone through the appropriate or the normal traditional steps of going through the committees, going to both sides, being approved by both chambers, and then moving on.
Well, it certainly hasn't gone through the normal vetting process. As we all know, there are a lot of ways a bill can become law, usually not the one in your government textbook, but this is a great example of that. It has grown somewhat slowly over the years. It is still very limited in the number of students affected.
Yeah, there's not a lot of kids taking advantage of it. As we testified yesterday, USA, KASB, KNEA, Stand Up Blue Valley, as we testified yesterday, it really doesn't, it's not about the dollars, it's not about the money. We all want to provide for our students, whether they're in a public school or private school. That is a parental choice. But I think what we spent the majority of our time on yesterday was trying to disseminate this idea that there's something wrong with our public schools. Public schools are performing poorly, which is kind of what the stories came out. We had a number of people that testified as proponents to the bill. They were testifying as on individual stories of how this child came to a private school from a public school with the tax credit at the parents' wish, and they were able to flourish. And some of the things they pointed out is they were in classes with 12 students and one teacher, which many of our public schools don't have the ability to do that. But we tried to point out some of the things that we know about our private schools that that are great about our private schools, that they do have other types of limitations, and that's why they're private schools. But our point was, if we're going to do this with public funds, if we're going to send public funds to private schools, then our private schools should have to allow every student in the door. They shouldn't be able to screen them, whether they would want them to come to school or not, and they should have the same regulations that we have in our public schools. And beyond the testing pieces, I think many of our private schools that are accredited are testing the same as our public schools, but there are many regulations that they don't have to abide by because they are private, and that's the point we got into yesterday, and we all got to have some back and forth in a very positive way with Representative Williams, Representative Erickson, and Representative Landwehr, who are very favorable of this bill. Tried to catch us at every corner of a misstatement, but Leah and Mark DeSetti did a great job of stepping in there and keeping their composure and moving the process through. So I think we were able to get our point across. Whether it resonates with enough of the members, and this is kind of a stacked committee, I think it's probably going to get out of committee, but hopefully on the House floor, we've got enough friends on the House floor that see that this is truly a voucher bill. It's not necessarily. I mean, it's there to help kids, but it's really just a voucher bill.
And I think that as you have these conversations with your local legislators, and frankly even within your community, so often this is set up as we want to give kids more choices, more opportunities, and I think most of us would agree not every child fits right in every district, every circumstance. The issue that I think most of us sincerely believe may be the problem, if you have one group of schools that can set their own criteria or their own discipline, or basically say, we'd love to help this child, but we just can't, and public schools have to serve all those children, and then public schools are criticized because they aren't doing well with kids that aren't selected, I think that's where maybe the suspicion or the bad feelings come from. If it were truly a matter of saying, let's all play to our strengths and make sure no one is left behind, but when you have a system that says, well, public schools, you take everyone, another system doesn't have to, that's, I think, the real fear, that it then creates a situation where, well, why are you doing so badly with the kids that you have to take? As someone who was always picked last for sports teams, it often comes down to a question of saying, what is really fair competition? Well, someone had to pick me, So I think those are the issues that it may be important to have, not framing an idea that we maybe don't want competition, we don't want choice. The point is the choice really with the child or with the school, and is the competition by the same rules? Right now, that's not the case.
That's not the case. And again, I think to me, another issue that arises here, especially when we're talking about government, and I'm being the old history government guy, when we start talking public funds for private entities, where does that stop? If we started here and we start moving forward with that, I mean, when does a private entity truly private and not become partially public?
Sure. And I guess, it's interesting, I don't want to prolong this, but I used to have these debates with a lot of different legislators.
I can't believe that.
And one of the things, as not everyone knows, I graduated from a private Catholic high school in Hays, Kansas. Fantastic education, very, very proud of that. Don't know how proud they are of me, but one of the issues that we always noted was, also remember, as you start receiving public benefits, if you believe there won't be public strings eventually attached, you're probably kidding yourselves. And so when you get used to those dollars, that sounds great. Someday there'll be a different legislature involved. And so I've always said, I think many people believe that vouchers or tax credits or whatever, is sort of like, well, we'll use competition to make, public schools more like private schools. Well, that really can't happen. I think the greater opportunity is that private schools will end up becoming more like public schools,
yeah.
and maybe that's fine. If we create it just like in higher education, if we have a system where private schools exist but basically compete on the same grounds as others, maybe that's a strength. But that's not the way it is right now in the rules that we operate.
And I think there are entities out there, private entities, that's not what they want either.
Yeah.
They want to be their own.
And that's why those discussions become an interesting one to have. Well, another very controversial bill that I had the opportunity to be a part of was House Bill 2461. So this is a bill some of you may have followed. It is proposed by Attorney General Derek Schmidt. It is designed to limit the ability, not prohibit, but control the ability of any local unit, school districts, cities, counties, others, to bring to have contingency-based legal contracts. Now, what this is...
The timing seems interesting to me,
well,
though.
what clearly this is being driven by are cases around vaping lawsuits that several school districts around the states have been a part of. Cities have gotten involved in opioid lawsuits, and of course, one of another case going back many decades ago, I guess by now, was over tobacco, smoking, those kinds of issues. Well, it turns out, and this was pointed out by opponents, that if the bill as written would cast a much wider net. Any contingency fees, which might be bond counsel, which might be collection agencies, which might be real estate contracts, would all be affected. And what it would do is require any of these, you'd have to have the approval of the Attorney General. So they'd have to review everything.
So I'm guessing you weren't by yourself.
No. We pointed out KASB does not have a specific position on this. It's not something we've really ever talked about till this year. But under the concept of local control, which I argued implies at least a balance. It doesn't mean that the locals should be able to do everything with no control, but it also doesn't mean that they should have no ability to operate or be entirely under state control. How do we reach that balance? So I think that there will be discussions. There's already been proposals that would limit the effect of this to not include some of those other examples, provide maybe different avenues by which attorney generals would have to give justification. So discussions are going to continue. This was supported by the Attorney General and the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, and then there were a number of other written proponents, much longer line of oral local governments and trial attorneys and others around this.
And
this
again,
was in...
Another great point, though, is like you just made about the legislature. This attorney generals are elected officials, and they come and they go, and so
a lot of points around that. While a lot of people said we don't mistrust this attorney general, he won't be attorney general forever. We're pretty sure. So that's a big So this is another one. If you're involved in these cases, or if you think you ever might be, do you want to lose the ability to, on your own, initiate these cases? Key point to have, this has started in the House. There's a good chance it will also be debated in the Senate. I don't believe there's a bill filed there yet. So could come out of committee. We don't know. I believe it's actually chaired by Fred Patton, who many of you know is a past president of KASB. Certainly is hoping to reach some kind of compromise. That may be difficult. For some people, local control is really a philosophy. I think there's also the sense that there is support for some of this concept. So can we reach an agreement that maybe we can at least be neutral on? I think we will be looking at that. But certainly, legislators need to hear from your concerns about this. A few other minor bills, then we're going to wrap up with one other bill that had a hearing just yesterday. The House Federal and State Affairs Committee had a hearing on a bill, excuse me, that would require the display essentially of a poster that would have the national motto, which history, God we trust. I was going to let people, do you know our national motto? And you would under this. Yes, that's right. We don't have Super Bowl tickets to give away, as well as a state flag, an American flag. You'd have to put these in every public building, every public school, classroom, and library, but only if they were donated.
Right.
So it's sort of not an unfunded mandate, a mandate only if people gave you the money or the
private funds.
And it would have to be private funds. So again, not even a tax credit to do it, as far as I know. We chose not to weigh in on this specifically. There was a lot of discussion. I think one of the immediate questions, well, would you actually get the money? I mean, where will this come from? How will you know? Is this a little bit of overkill? And my guess is, having been in a lot of schools, that a lot of schools display the motto and flag. So I don't, and the proponents were not really able to cite a problem, but it was just seen we want to inculcate patriotism.
Did I read the bill right though, Mark? When you talk about public facilities, the school was the only place that had to be in every classroom.
Correct.
So, like if an office building, though, it wouldn't have to be in every office and every public
it would
room.
not, or every floor, every elevator. So we'll see how the bill gets worked. So again, this would be another good example to make. I mean, now I've always said, ironically, for sometimes when people have talked about wanting, more school choice and that sort of thing, traditionally one of the roles of public education is to inculcate civic values and civic pride and those sorts of things by having kids go to a common school to learn these things. So it's interesting. We want to promote that. That's something we've always done. Yet at the same time, we're talking about expanding options. There are values to that. That doesn't mean that every qualifying private school is necessarily going to do these the same way. I'm being told lower. Oh, I'm blasting people out. I'm sorry. Okay, so much for the hidden microphone, which wasn't working anyway. Okay, that was one. No action yet. That same day was another bill just of some interest that would have 2477 would designate Election Day in even-numbered years as a state holiday. It would join other state holidays. Don't know whether this will go anywhere. It's actually a class project.
Topeka Seaman.
Topeka Seaman. Kids, I understand, did a great job.
They did
Leah
a
was
wonderful
covering
job.
this.
Yep.
So again, interesting that we don't know the fate of both of these. We'll be watching them. Last bill we want to touch on for this week, though, is another one that our organizations have both been trying to work on, and that is House Bill 2507. Concept's very simple. To try to create some limits on liability for work-based learning.
Right.
So kids who go into a work environment, the concern is that businesses are not willing to participate because of risks of lawsuit.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about kind of what you've been working on, committee's reaction.
So the crux of the bill places all the onus onto the school districts. That's part of the challenge of the bill itself. It's and it specifies neglect of the student would be the school district's responsibility. Negligence on behalf of the business would be on the onus of the school as well. And that talking with KSB's legal department and their insurance department, their risk management, that's just not going to fly. There's not going to be underwriters that are going to underwrite those types of insurance policies. So we testified on behalf of this bill. We were neutral. We're not opposed. Our organizations are not opposed to putting this type of legislation together, but there has to be this this balance. Businesses need to be responsible for their, and again, I'm not an insurance guy, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, but there has to be a balance of duty of care of your facility. And so what we're asking for is that the business is responsible for their duty of care, schools are responsible for theirs, and then the student is responsible for the student. And if there's an accident, we need to have accident type of insurance to support the business in those situations, which many of us already do. But if there's negligence on the base of the students, my understanding is with current accident insurance that schools have, that negligence on the student's part isn't necessarily covered by the insurance company. It's covered by the student and the student's family. And so with this bill, the school districts would be responsible for that negligent act by the student, which again places us in a difficult situation because we don't necessarily have insurance coverage for that. And there is a statute out there, and I have that fancy name here, but statute 721146, again, the attorneys came up with this, but that statute says a school board can't enter into an agreement where they are, the other organization is held harmless. And so this, as bill as written, is in conflict with current statute. Now, obviously, legislature can change both statutes, but we are going to be, we're working with this, trying to create some neutralized language trying to create a bill that everybody can work with, our businesses. We want to work with our businesses. This really came out of the Governor's Council on Education, which we've discussed over the last 2 years with Governor Collier and Governor Kelly's council. So we know it's important for our businesses, but we can't put all the we can't require the schools to be everything to everyone.
So this is one where, again, we're trying to work with the committee, members of the committee. As you talk to local legislators, I think it's clear to say, I think certainly our organizations, I think most of our members think this is a good idea. Part of the whole redesign element is we want to make this possible.
It's a big part of that.
Our objection is absolutely not to the concept. It is only to say if you imbalance the risk, then districts are not going to have the coverage to do it.
Right. And are going to be unable to do it.
That's right. So we're not saying we don't want to do it. We're just trying to say it needs to be worded in a way to make that possible.
And we did give some examples of this is going on across the state today.
Right.
Even in some, we have kids in multiple districts that are doing internships and work study programs in fire and safety. And so they're in these high-risk situations already, and there's already an agreement out there. We just need to make sure we can find something that works for everybody, that makes everybody comfortable. I love the word balance. Okay. That's perfect.
Okay, let's switch, Ed, to next week, and we're going to caution you. There's 2 big bills coming up we want to focus on. There's some other things that are kind of well, I hate to say lesser importance, but are not likely to be as controversial. And we want to note, as we said, bills keep coming in. There will be more introduced today. They could be added to the schedule, so watch for our updates. First one we want to mention, though, is on Tuesday, the Senate Education Committee at 1:30 will be holding a hearing on Senate Bill 271. This is the bill that would repeal the sunset on high-density weighting. So simplest terms is it would just allow high-density weighting to continue as is.
Yeah.
And so this is one, about $50 million roughly is the estimated cost, not for every district, so some of you would not be affected by this, but in effect, those districts, because high density at risk is the districts that have a higher percentage, starting generally around 30% or more, and rising with concentration of free lunch eligible students. So what failing to take this action would mean is the districts with the highest population of low income kids, strongly correlated with being at risk, not identical of course, would lose resources.
Right. And that's where we need you to help us out. We need those folks that this is going to impact the most. Those of you that are relying upon that high density at risk to come up and testify with us on Tuesday. Now this, what we'd love for you to do, and we're happy to help you do this, except maybe between 5:30 and 9 o'clock Sunday night. But we'll be happy to help you with this, put this testimony together. But what we'd like for you to do is come up and talk about what programs that you're using in your school that are being funded through high density at risk, and then the importance of those programs, and then maybe tell a story about here's a student or two that this is affecting, this is how it's affecting this group of students, and really paint the picture for our legislators how important these dollars are. Because I think especially in this after the post audit, I think there's this impression that we're just frivolously spending at-risk money, and we know that's not the fact, but we need your help to help tell those stories. So as I sit here with the magical list of those folks that are receiving some of those monies, we could really use you to come up and provide some help for us on Tuesday and tell some of your stories, because truly in Senator Hensley's bill, it would remove the sunset totally, correct?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And so that is big. It means we don't have to come back and attack this every 2 years, which is the case right now. And so if we can get that completely removed, and it's really going to come from your help. We're not going to be able to do it by ourselves, as impressive as Mr. Tallman is with his testimony and data and graphs.
I'm working on that, but in fact, Gia is right. Hearing examples is what is critically important. We can come back anytime, and that also is important because, as I think you've been following, the whole at-risk audit has created a lot of questions, ranging into deep skepticism about what we're doing with the money.
And we even saw that yesterday in 2465.
That's right. So part of the issue that I think this bill creates the opportunity, certainly come testify if you can, if not, submit in writing, but certainly be talking to your legislators, because this will ultimately be voted on by every legislator in the House and Senate. So helping them understand what you use the money for, how you select the programs you do, the results you're seeing from it. And one of the things that we have to be very clear about is the concern that some of our measures, test scores being the best example of state assessments, have dropped for several years, have really plateaued. Our biggest answer is we've only begun to infuse new money, but we need to be talking about why has the lack of money kept us from making progress? How are we using the new money now? And what is our rationale for believing they are?
Exactly.
So critical hearing, but that issue is going to be around and really is the one big issue we have to deal with this session.
And this is really going to be the jumping off point probably for those additional at-risk conversations.
Correct. So the other major bill this week, and I tried to explain it, and GA asked for a chart. I don't have one yet.
Big charts
but
and graphs.
We will hopefully be sending out with our daily updates a description of Senate Bill 294, which has a hearing on Wednesday. To make it hopefully simple, this is referred to as a truth in taxation property tax bill. So it's about transparency is the argument behind it. In its simplest form, it would say for every local unit that is funded through property taxes, every year that entity would have to calculate a mill rate that would raise no more dollars than the year before. Basically, this is designed to say you can't profit from increases in valuation that allow you to bring in more money even at the same, because people are saying, well, my mill rate hasn't gone up, but my property went up, so my taxes went up.
Okay.
So the idea conceptually is to say that you can't raise any more money. If you want to, you can, but you have to go through a couple of steps. You have to go through this calculation and determine then, I want to raise this much more. Then you have to put a notice in your paper of record, which has time and cost involved. But here's the critical point. Then the county clerk has to send, or treasurer, county officials have to send an individualized, as we read it, an individualized notice to every taxpayer explaining how this proposed increase would affect that taxpayer. This has to be done basically between August 1st, could be potentially that late, to when you adopt your budget, August 25th, and you have to have a public hearing. It can be the same public hearing as your normal public hearing, but it has to be done in a way that no taxing units that are wanting to raise this certified amount could have the meeting at the same time. So you'd have to coordinate with everyone else in your county regarding the scheduling of doing this.
And the district would be responsible for the
mailing. All these costs that we're talking about, the district would have to pay for. So here, I guess, in the simplest form, that we think what your message has to be, what our message will be in testimony, is not in any way to talk about whether this is good or bad for local units who would face all these same challenges, but virtually every part of the school budget relying on property tax is already either capped, limited, subject to protest petition, or equalized in a way that means frequently districts would have to go through this process, or could have to go through an expensive process just to fund their kind of expected budget. So for example, local option budget. You may have a change in what you have to levy because of a change in equalization to simply fund the same percentage of your budget that might be going up because the state has raised your base. Your voters, if you are over 30%, have already approved going to a percentage by having that's subject to protest petition, either vote or subject to protest petition, and the state requires you to have a 15% LOB.
And then we're going to add this on top of
On top of that, your capital outlay is already subject to protest petition for a mill levy amount, not a dollar amount. In other words, if your constituents don't want to risk a higher mill levy, they have that option now. Bond and interest aid. You basically have to levy what is required to service your bonds. You might have to go through this process just to have the money to do that, particularly if you have, again, maybe a shift in state equalization aid. And then finally, for a few of our districts, this would affect, as we understand it, cost of living and ancillary weighting, both of which already have protest petition features or Board of Tax Appeals. So these are not issues where school districts can just decide we want to raise more money. There's already a lot around it that do not apply to cities, counties, townships, et cetera.
So this new regulation would only apply to schools?
No, it would apply to everyone.
So counties and cities and municipalities,
everyone would be affected.
Okay.
Cemetery district.
Cemetery, right. Any entity, any taxing unit or subdivision that relies on property tax would be affected. Our point is just for schools, and I think this is what many people don't understand, is that if you don't understand how school finance works, you may just think, well, there's my school board, just they can raise whatever they want.
But there are
the point is there are already a number of mechanisms which limit how much that can happen. And of course, some legislators have criticized schools because they don't use their full LOB authority right now. Well, so again, our basic point is to say we just don't believe that within the way school finance works, this potentially very expensive and cumbersome process is necessary when there are other mechanisms that the voters have. And of course, the voters always have the recourse every 2 years of changing their school board.
Yeah. But this might be a great opportunity for superintendents and clerks to work with your city government, your county government, to oppose this type of regulation, because it really, I mean, along with just the idea of the time frame, but this is going to add a lot of work on top of it.
And that I think is the key, that what potentially might not be for a great deal of money, a potentially very expensive process. Right. And again, I have no idea what it would take to have to produce these individualized. It would be one thing to say you have to use the normal process of putting notice in the paper and that sort of thing to give people notice, but to actually add this step would be a real step forward. So,
but especially some of our suburban districts that would potentially have to do this every single year.
Correct. So that has a hearing in the Senate Assessment and Taxation Committee at 9:30 on Wednesday. Again, a key thing to be talking about. I'm sorry. Yeah, Rob. Just to be clear, high density at risk is Tuesday. This issue is Wednesday. And really, at this point, those are the biggest things we see coming up. The governor's proposals for KASB reamortization has hearings in both the House and Senate this week. There is a proposal. Well, we've probably gone about far enough. So let's stop there. We've hoped given you some things, again, for those conversations with your local representatives. Any other thing we ought to hit on before we wrap up?
I saw a tweet last night that made me check this, and although the governor did a wonderful job in her State of the State identifying this, with amortization, it will not affect anybody's retirement. I saw a tweet last night that said, "Don't take my retirement." If this happens or when this happens, either way, it will affect anybody's KASB's retirement zero. There will be no negative effect on it at all.
The fund
is safe.
This is a cash flow choice for the state. The governor is basically saying, we would rather extend our payments and pay more.
Yeah. And only extend them 10 years,
right.
not
as last year,
right.
A new 30% start over. But, I mean, what the critics would say is doing that will keep us at a very high level of contributions, not as high. I mean, her plan would bring them down somewhat, but it would be longer till we could bring them down even more.
So we're going to hit 2 years. We're hitting a peak of almost $1 billion payment a year. Is that what that is?
Yes, and that will extend really about to amortization. Now, here's the key. Under the current system, when you pay that off, it's like paying off your mortgage. And so people have said, if you want to be in the legislature, be in the legislature in like 2034, because then you'll
money rolling in.
That's right, and that's why KASB's executive director Alan Conroy deeply respected, is basically saying we will probably, as the Capers Board, recommend reamortization at some point, but the Capers Board is not recommending at this time. They say we still have too high of a level, and so the time may come we're not there. So I guess I'm getting the Go Chiefs sign. I think that means we've been here enough. Everyone's getting very excited. There's probably still more food here left in the building.
Oh,
so,
good point.
So we're going to wrap up for now. Of course, if you have any questions, contact either of us. Follow our information. We anticipate a very exciting post-Super Bowl week.
There we go.
Hopefully all of our legislators will be in a good mood.
And,
So,
maybe if they win and Wednesday there's a big parade, maybe the legislature will just shut down.
that's possible. That's certainly possible.
Probably not probable, but
That's right. Thank you for joining us, GA. Thank you for your insights, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.